Good afternoon to everyone that has joined us today, and good morning to those of you that have joined us from overseas. It's great to have you here, and as always, if you're one of our regulars on the webinars, you'll know we just let people join and just settle in. You haven't got time to make a coffee, but just to settle in a bit. So this is the second webinar that we've run with Sam. And the last webinar was really informative, got some great feedback. So obviously, Sam, I don't want to put any additional pressure on you for this webinar.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mel. No pressure.
So as I said, we'll be starting again shortly. But what Sam is going to be discussing is how to choose the right employer of record partner for your business. So obviously, this is a really important topic, and as employer of record, the industry has, should I say, exploded? I don't know if that's the right word.
I think it
Um,
could
has,
be.
yeah, has grown so much. I think it is really important because I think there seems to be new employer of records starting up every single week. So, it's something that's on our radar that we're seeing so many people join or start up the business, shall I say. So I was just checking my watch. So we've left it for a minute. So I will be quiet shortly. But we would like this to be interactive. So Sam will answer your questions, or if there's any questions that we can't answer at the time, then we'll come back to you. But Sam, for those of you that don't know you, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mel. So I'm Sam Barnes. I'm the co-founder and sales director of Agility EOR. So my background is in international entity expansions, helping clients to establish themselves in overseas jurisdictions, and more recently in employer of records specifically. As you said, this is the second webinar we've done together. So last time we looked at how to really understand the costs involved when you use an employer of record. And this time I thought it would be interesting to have a look at choosing the right partner for those people perhaps who are trying to whittle down a long list.
Thanks, Sam. So I'm going to come off camera now and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Mel. So I've pulled together a bit of an agenda for today. So we're going to look at why we need to pose the question that's the subject of today's webinar. We're going to look at the relevance of knowing where your employees are going to be. I'll ask the question, how important are your employees to you, and particularly the employees that you're going to have overseas? We'll look at the role of technology in EOR, or more specifically, the role of technology in choosing the right EOR partner for your business. We'll have owned entities versus partners, that discussion, bit of debate around that. We'll look at getting to know your EOR and, of course, factoring in price. So I'd like to kick off, Mel, if I may, with the first polling question.
Yes. So fingers crossed. I'm just saying every time I run a webinar, Zoom likes to change where the polls are or how we add the polls. So I have anxiety over launching a poll, but I think we're there. So I'm going to launch the
Give it a
first
go.
poll. Yeah, let's do it. So which of these best describes your understanding of employer of record solutions? Very familiar. I've used EOR services. Somewhat familiar. I have a good understanding of how an EOR works, but have never used one. Not very familiar. I know what EOR stands for, but that's about it. So I'm in the position that I can see the results. So don't ask me, Sam, but what do you reckon?
Well, so I asked this question, exactly the same question on the previous webinar that we did, and I have to say the results surprised me. So I thought it would be interesting just to ask it again, and we'll see whether we get the same sorts of results or whether we get a different answer.
Can you remember what the results were last time?
Yeah, so lots of people were not very familiar. And I was expecting perhaps more towards the very familiar end. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if it's different with today's audience.
Okay, so I always have this magic number, this geeky magic number I like to get, and we're over that. So thank you very much for those of you that answered. If you want to answer quickly, I'm just going to end the poll. So if there's a few of you that haven't answered, but if you want to, no, is then we're gonna no, okay. I'm gonna end I'm gonna end the poll now. Oh, somebody did. Thank you so much. Okay, so here you go. Here are the results. Can you see them?
I can see them. Again, there are quite a few still in the not very familiar,
Mm.
but what we're seeing is quite a lot now in at least somewhat familiar, and a few there in the very familiar category. And I think because we're moving more towards the somewhat familiar and the very familiar, let's. Is it for me to close that poll, Mel?
I'm doing it now. Sorry, I thought you were
You're
still talking. So I'm
no,
gonna.
that's fine. So having seen more very familiar and somewhat familiar than we did last time, goes some way to explaining why we're posing the question about choosing the right EOR partner for us. Um, let's just move on to the next slide. So what we've seen is that the employer of record market has changed enormously, and you alluded to this in your introduction. Over the last 5 years, people are now more familiar because it's such a commonly used concept. There are so many providers to choose from, and I've heard estimates of anything up to about 1,000 employer of record companies, would you believe, around the world. So obviously, for the most part, that's a really good thing. So a competitive market helps to keep the costs down for the customer. It means that any EOR providers who really aren't giving a good enough service will simply go out of business. So for the most part, the competition is a good thing for the customer. However, it means that the task of whittling down 1,000 providers to the right one for you to work with could be quite an overwhelming prospect. And that's why I thought it would be interesting to do today's webinar with the idea of giving the audience some questions that they can take away to help anybody out there who's going through that process of trying to find the right partner for them. So the first thing I'd like to look at is the relevance of geography. So when you go and talk to EOR providers, they're going to ask you for some basic information. They're going to want to know things like what's the role that the person's going to be doing for you? What have you found a candidate yet? Tell us about them. Tell us how much you're going to pay them. But it will help you enormously if you know right from the start whereabouts in the world you're going to want to employ people, not just in the immediate term, but in the reasonably foreseeable future. So perhaps over the next 5 years or so. So go and find out, are your needs in just one country, lots of countries but on the same continent, or are you going to be hiring in countries all around the world? If you're going to be hiring in just one country, it's well worth taking the time to try and find a one country provider. They're likely to be less expensive, and they're certainly going to have true local expertise. So although there might be some difficulty in finding them, possibly some language issues or time zone issues to overcome, it's probably worth it for a single country project. If you're likely to be going into several countries, but all on the same continent, have a look for a regional provider. And there's some very good regional providers out there. They're likely to have a bigger team, so they'll be more available to you. And although they'll cost a bit more than the single country provider will, they're going to have the coverage to be able to manage employees all throughout their region. And then, of course, if you're going to have people around the world, look for a global provider at the start. So if you know over the next 5 years, we're likely to have people in multiple countries around the world, it's beneficial to start with a provider with global coverage, because although they're going to cost more still, they're going to save you that money back in managing your global workforce and providing you employee specific information in an easily digestible format. You'll have things like a single invoice to pay the payroll of all your employees around the world and a single point of contact for any queries that you might have on HR matters. So the first takeaway question is, know whether you're looking for a single country provider, a regional provider, or a global provider. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is how important are your employees? And Mel, this is the next polling question, please.
Okay, let me just go to this.
I like this question. I feel it could be contentious.
I do, yeah, it is. I don't think I've ever asked this question on a poll before, I think. Okay, so can you see that on screen? How important are your employees? They are everything to us. Our most important asset, without which we would have no business. They are important but not irreplaceable. our employees are a bit of an inconvenience and we can't wait for the machines to take over. So what do you reckon then, Sam?
Well, I know what I'm expecting to see, and yeah, I think we're going to see. I hope we're going to see lots of people with employees who are really important assets to their business. Um, but it could be that's not always the case.
No. And I I'm just waiting for one person to answer.
Pe-
But it's good. It's actually really interesting. Okay, so we've gone past my geeky magic number. If you haven't answered, please, I'm going to end the poll shortly. So please answer if you want to. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. Thank you very much for everyone. And here are the results. There you go.
Good. So as I was expecting, lots of people saying that they're really important assets to business. I'm pleased to see that, and they're important but not irreplaceable. About a third of respondents. So again, that's not entirely glad that nobody's waiting for the machines to take over.
I really wanted
Um,
one person to answer that, even if it was a joke. But anyway.
Well, I think as we were expecting to see, most people will say that their employees are the most important asset to their business, and rightly so. But when I'm talking to people who are evaluating EOR services, they do all place different levels of value on their global workforce. So lots of businesses do want to make sure that the people that they employ through an EOR feel just as much a part of their company as their own directly employed people do, because they put value on employee experience. But that's not the same for everyone, and there are definitely businesses using EORs who, for whatever reason, aren't looking for anything more than their people being paid accurately and on time, which should be a given. So I think it's important to consider things like how difficult your candidate was to find in the first place, how hard they'd be to replace if they left, or if it's an existing employee, perhaps that you're relocating, what would the cost of finding and training someone to replace them be if they didn't have a good experience when engaged via your chosen EOR partner and left? Obviously, if the workforce that you are considering hiring via an EOR is easily replaceable and it's of lower value to your business, then maybe you can afford to place a lower value on things like the onboarding experience that the EOR offers. It might be a bit less important what the communication's like for the employee. Maybe you can let a few payroll inaccuracies go. But if you care greatly about your employees, then you need to be looking for an EOR which cares just as much as you do. I think if losing that candidate would be a complete disaster, then you need to pick an EOR partner which gives more of a white glove treatment, even if that means that you're going to be paying a higher fee. So things like looking for an employer of record that delivers a fully account managed service, and a point of contact for the candidate to talk to, versus a lower cost solution that's perhaps predominantly platform based. Right, next we're going to look at the role of technology in EOR, or more importantly, the role of technology in choosing the right EOR partner for your business. And Mel, this is our third polling question, please.
And final one.
Third and final polling question, you're right.
Yeah. Okay. If you were searching for an employer of record company, would you most feel you were looking for? Oh, that's really good. Can you see, can you see the whole answer, the whole question?
Well, no, that's a deliberate ...
Oh, I'm sorry. You made me panic then.
No, don't
Sorry.
panic. Don't panic.
Okay. Oh yeah, sorry. A platform, a service, a bit of both. I failed on my duties there as launching the polls. What do you think is going to be the answer to this one?
I'm interested to see if it reflects what I hear when the phone rings and somebody asks me about what we do at Agility, and what those people are looking for. I know what my view would be of this, but it'd be interesting to see what the audience thinks.
Would you be happy to share your view, or are you going to share that afterwards?
Well, I am going to share that, Mel. I
Okay.
don't want to spoil it
Okay.
for anybody by getting ahead of ourselves, but certainly I'll be telling you what I think the
Good.
answer is.
Okay, so we have hit that number again. So I'm just going to shut the poll in a few seconds. So if you haven't and you'd like to, would you like to put your answers in now? Okay. So here are the results. A platform, a service, a bit of both.
Yeah. So I would say that most people they are agreeing with what I would think. I think a bit of both is probably right. Um, One of the changes that we've seen in the EOR space over the past few years is that increase in platform-based solutions. So a lot of the time when the phone rings, the question is, can we see your platform? That's the first thing. So there's perhaps a bit more of an assumption that there's a commodity there rather than a service. Um, the platforms are really important. They allow businesses to easily provide candidate role information to supply all the raw data that we need as EORs to process payroll. And for anything that's like a core business as usual function, the platforms are very, very helpful. They certainly speed up the process of working with an EOR. And of course, sharing data via a protected platform is much safer than emails and the various attachments. So the vast majority of leading providers have now got platforms, and I don't think there's any doubt that their existence has improved the offerings of employer of records in general. However, the service element is equally important, and there will be times when you need somebody to ask you the questions that you don't yet know to ask, and there will be times when things happen which are outside of business as usual, and I think that service and human element is much more important to deal with those things and much more effective perhaps than just working with a platform. So in choosing the right EOR partner for you, there are some important things I think you should be asking yourself. So what is it that goes alongside the platform? For example, do I get a dedicated account manager? If an issue arises, am I content to be working with FAQs and bots, or do I prefer to communicate with a real person? And if it's the latter, how easy is it to find a phone number for your EOR partner? Mel, I think you know that's a challenge I always like to put out there. We Agility publish a phone number on our website, and I always we welcome people to call us. We like to have the conversations and be able to help people that way. If you're using a platform, does it give you a more of a one size fits all output? So, for example, is an employment contract that's going to your employee able to be tailored? Or is it simply as produced by the machine, take it or leave it? Would you benefit from interacting with an expert team who have the opportunity to ask you those questions you don't yet know to ask? And how complex are your reporting needs? So if you plan to have lots of employees through the EOR all over the world, you might want to be able to run your own bespoke reports. Whereas if you've only got a handful of people, that might not be such an important feature. So I think a little bit of both. Be looking for platform definitely, but understand what kind of service is behind it. Right, owned entities or partners, the big debate. So we get asked all the time whether we've got our own entities. And my feeling is that there is an assumption amongst those who are looking at EORs that having your employer of record having its own entities is necessarily better. We have lots of our own entities, and there are definitely advantages to that. However, I don't think it's necessarily the best situation for every single case. So consider these two statements on the screen. So by working with local partners in the jurisdictions we cover, we have access to a greater depth of expertise. We share the overheads of running the international entities with other businesses who use the same local partner, reducing our costs and therefore our fees. Or by having our own local entities, we have full control over the costs of delivering our solution. And because we only work with directly employed people, we can provide a more responsive service. So in my opinion, both of those statements are equally true. And what that means is when you're looking at EOR providers, don't just ask, is this your own entity or have you got a local partner? Ask some follow-up questions. So if somebody's using a local partner, who are they? How did you choose them? Who's responsible if the local partner makes an error? Or if somebody says that they've got their own entities, how do they keep up to date with local knowledge? Is there somebody on the ground who's going to be able to talk to your employee in their own language and their own time zone? Um, Also, interesting one to note, um, employer of records might have their own infrastructure without having a full entity. So in some countries, you could be set up as a foreign employer, and that might be completely compliant and allowable, but it could be quite limiting for the employees. So, for example, if you in the Czech Republic, if you set up as a foreign employer, so if you the employee are employed by a foreign business, you probably won't be able to get a mortgage. So your EOR partner employing them through a full entity would actually be really important in that question. So the takeaway here is don't be put off by either own entities or your EOR having a partner in turn, but do ask those follow-up questions to understand a little bit more. Okay, so the biography of your EOR, getting to know your EOR. I confess I pinched this terminology from somebody else in our space, somebody I've known for a long time and respect, and he was doing some evaluation of different employer of record services and trying to understand what it was that clients valued about different EOR provisions, and I really liked his inclusion of biography. So I thought we would have it in today's webinar. And I think what he meant by this was, what's the story behind the company that you're working with? So things like, how old is it? Is it an employer of record specialist business, or is that a bolt-on to some other core business activity? Who owns it and what's their experience? Who's the person looking after your account? And what's the ethos of the business that you're entrusting your workforce to? So we've already heard today that, the audience certainly feel that their workforce is an important asset. So I think if I were looking for an EOR solution, a company that was responsible for looking after that important asset, I would definitely want to understand the background of the partner I was thinking of working with. And for me, when I'm pitching agility services to a prospective client, one of the things I most want to convey is that I really care whether they get the service that I say they'll get. So I have experience in the employer of record sector. I staff my business appropriately so that I can be close to the clients, and it keeps me awake at night if I feel something's not going right for somebody. So I think the takeaway from this one is, when you choose your EOR partner, ask yourself who in that business is in charge of making sure that you get what it was that you were sold. Factoring in costs. So I don't think we could complete a webinar on choosing the right EOR partner for your business without factoring in the costs. And costs link directly to some of the key factors that we've already discussed in the webinar. So things like, if you choose a single country provider, the fees will almost certainly be lower, but it's also likely to take more of your time to manage, meaning the cost to you may be higher. Or if you choose a provider which is solely platform based, then their fees are likely to be lower, but it could ultimately cost you more if the employee doesn't get the right experience and leaves, or if a potential employer of record doesn't have the right level or the right number of people. They might seem cheap on their charges, but what might it cost you if they aren't looking after your employees properly, and you end up with employees who either leave or are in some way distracted from their work. Businesses obviously have budgetary constraints. It could be that the EOR provider you most want to work with is going to cost you more than you've got to spend, a bit like buying a car. You might love to have a Bentley, for example. You could perhaps make do with a mid-range saloon, but the budget says you're buying something that's got four wheels today, and you know you're going to have to replace it in 12 months' time. So budget may be a necessary limiting factor, but if you have got the funds, consider that paying a higher fee may actually result in a lower cost. And equally, beware of paying over the odds for services that you're never actually going to use. So maybe your EOR allows you to run unlimited bespoke reports, but if you only expect to have one employee, that's probably not much use to you. Or perhaps the EOR that you're thinking of working with is charging a bit more because they're set up to take cryptocurrency. But if you never plan to pay like that, then that's probably a redundant feature. So in summary, to choose the right EOR partner for you, have your requirements ready and give particular focus to where you want to employ people. Think about the people you're going to employ and how important they are to your business. How much do you want to speak with a person versus work in a platform? And how complex are your reporting requirements? Don't worry too much about whether an EOR has its own entities. A reliable local partner might be just as good. Get to know the business you're thinking of working with and consider the whole costs, not just the EOR fees. If your budget can stretch, you might ultimately get better value from a provider with a higher fee. Now, those points are obviously all very EOR specific. I'd absolutely advocate for talking to people in your network, getting recommendations, taking references, the same as you would when you buy any service. But hopefully some of the questions that we've posed in today's webinar will be useful to you in whittling down your long list. So good luck. I hope you find the right partners for you. And I think we've probably left ourselves time for a few questions, Mel.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So thank you, Julie, for your question. Is it commonplace for EOR providers to engage in country partners and hire employees into that ICP?
I'm not sure I understand the questions. Repeat the question, Mel, please.
Is it commonplace for employer of record providers to engage in country partners let me start again because you're definitely not going to understand that. Right. Is it commonplace for EOR providers to engage in country partners and hire employees into that ICP?
Yes. So it is commonplace for EOR providers to have a partner in turn, if I'm understanding the question correctly, and use that partner to be the direct hirer of the employees. So in that situation, the employer of record company is fronting the service to their client, and they'll have a partner in turn who's legally the employer.
So that is basically the model of an employer of record, isn't it? That if the ICP is the employer of record, they would become the employer.
That's right. So it's one of two things. Either the employer of record will have its own entity. So in some countries, our business, for example, will have its own entity and its own team. We'll run our own payroll, so there is no third party involved. And in other situations, yes, it might be another business like ours who's the legal employer, and we are we're fronting that. One of the things that we're doing in that scenario, and lots of employer of records do this, is we're managing multiple overseas partners so our clients don't have to.
Okay. In a competitive market, quotation turnaround time is key. How do you provide your quote calculations and how long does it take Agility to provide a quote?
Really good question. One of the things that I like to do, and if the person who asked the question was on the previous webinar, they might have seen this. One of the things I always like to do is to talk to somebody rather than just send a number out. There are lots of things that we might want to ask a prospective client to ultimately help them get to a more accurate picture and a fuller picture of the costs. So and in different countries, different things can affect the cost. We'll always have a quote out to somebody within 24 hours, but I do like to have time to have that call first if we can.
So we have mentioned the previous webinar a couple of times, so it is available. So if anybody would like to watch that again, you can contact us and we can provide you with the link to watch it. It is a really good webinar. What importance do you place on having an EOR company who are based where I am or where the employee is?
What importance do you
What
place?
importance do you place on having an EOR company who are based where I am or where the
Okay.
employee is?
Okay, I see. So where the business's headquarters is or where their employee is.
Yeah.
I think if you've got an EOR that's placed where you are headquartered, that's quite convenient for you because obviously you can talk to somebody in your language and your time zone. If you've got an employer of record who is based in the country where your employee is, that's quite good for the employee because they can talk to somebody in their language and their time zone. I think the important thing to remember is in any scenario, there's got to be a conversation that could be crossing the world. So I would say I would place very low importance on that. I don't think I wouldn't favor one over the other. Maybe marginally more important to have them where the employee is rather than where you are.
Okay. If the employee is employed by the ICP and has a sign-on bonus with a clawback, how do we guarantee that our business gets a sign-on bonus back if needed when we aren't a party to this agreement or have a relationship with the ICP?
That might be one to take offline and discuss, but I would say your protections are going to be in the terms that you've got with your employer of record partner. But happy to, if that's somebody who'd like to have a conversation, happy to have a look at the specifics of that question.
Yeah. So, and they can contact you on LinkedIn. Is that okay? Is that the best? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, LinkedIn, there's some contact details there, but
Or your email
yes,
address.
or yeah, email. Yeah, as you know, Mel, there's a phone number on our website. But yeah, find me on LinkedIn by all means.
Okay, thank you for the webinar and tackling EOR standards to companies. However, I appreciate if we can also tackle best EOR standards to employees hired under outsourcing umbrella. So that's another topic potentially that we need to look
Yeah,
at.
that could be one for a whole different webinar, couldn't it? I think I associate umbrella companies with engaging contractors around the world. Certainly, there's a place for that. Of course, in the employer of record world, we're always very careful and talking to our customers about making sure that they haven't misclassified people who should be employees as contractors. So all I would say very briefly at this point is just to be very aware of what the rules are in the country that you've got that worker and making sure that they genuinely are a contractor as opposed to an employee.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it? Because there seems to be a few red flags at the moment with some EORs encouraging contractor rather than employee, um, which is, yeah, as I said, is a red flag. So that's a really good topic.
Yeah, there has been some well documented cases of that in our in the EOR space. I think it's almost all businesses that we talk to, they really want to be compliant, but it's easy to misunderstand what constitutes an employee, and there's lots of questions around direction and control that ultimately determine whether somebody's a contractor or an employee.
And just to make a controversial statement, potentially, I would go by the rules and not what the employer of record tells you.
Absolutely. My mantra is always if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. So have a look at things like is this person have they got has the worker got other clients in turn? Are they representing themselves as their own business or as my business? Have they got to check in with me when they want to take a holiday? Ultimately, are they delivering an outcome for me, or are they a resource that I can deploy as I wish? So even irrespective of the country, there are some basic tests like that. Um, there's a an article on our website called something like if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. And it's all about how to decide if somebody's a contractor or an employee.
So I feel like we're coming to a natural end. So if you do have any questions, please add them now. Do have one question to ask. How do I know if employer of record is the right solution for my business at all?
Okay, so how do you know in the first place, even before we get to choosing the
Yeah.
right employer of record, how do you know whether you should be looking at employer of record? Okay, I would say employer of record is usually right for fewer than 10 employees in any one country. When you get to more than 10 employees, you might be looking at setting up your own entity. As we've just talked about, there are some situations in which somebody is legitimately a contractor, in which case you don't need an employer of record, you need a contracting management company. And there are occasions when you might have some strategic need that means you need to set up your own entity and you need your own infrastructure to employ. So, for example, if you've got a client in turn, and your client expects to see your presence in that country, maybe they want you to contract with them from that country, the employer of record solution doesn't work for you. You need your own entity. So EOR is for relatively small numbers of people, quick deployments, and certainly situations where you may not need to stay in that country forever, because with an employer of record, as soon as you've not got the employee anymore, you can walk away.
Fab. And my last question is, are there any industry specific considerations when choosing an EOR partner?
Um, I would say most EORs are sector agnostic, but there are certain sectors which don't necessarily lend themselves to working with an EOR solution. So we often don't do things with manufacturing businesses because that manufacturing business is likely to need some sort of premises and perhaps larger numbers of people. Retail, people who are working on an hourly rate, maybe getting time and a half on a Saturday, wouldn't traditionally be employed via an EOR. So I would say no, there aren't particular industry specific considerations, unless maybe you're an industry where you need to have a sort of particular license and accreditation to do what you do, in which case your accreditation might not extend to people that you have via an EOR. So that would be one to check with your accrediting body.
Thanks, Sam. So I'm sort of overlooking what you've discussed today. It's really get to know your employer of record. Don't just use them as an add-on, use them as a partner, because they're going to be a crucial part of payroll and a business going forward.
I think so. And I think, yeah, we saw, I think it was 78% of people say that they really saw their employees as a vital asset to their business. If that's the case, treat them the same as you would your own employees. Think about the whole experience that's given by the employer of record. You might have to pay a little bit more to have a partner who really values and is going to collaborate with you and is going to be a partner to you, understand the way that you treat your own employees, and try and reflect that onto the people that they're looking after on your behalf.
Okay, well, thanks, Sam. Is there anything else that you want to say before we finish today?
Well, other than thank you for having me, Mel. It's always a pleasure to do these webinars. Really pleased to be back, and I've very much enjoyed it. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. The slides and the recording will be available on our website. So if you have missed any of it, then it will be available to view. We'll hope to do some more webinars with Sam in the future. So if there's anything else in particular that you'd like to know about an employer of record, please contact either of us, because then that's something that we can build and run in the future. But thank you to everyone that asked questions, and thank you to everyone that joined us today. We look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you.